I'm Stu Herring. I suppose I'm a performance artist, amongst other styles of art. This is a very installation-based show, but something a bit different from when I probably last showed. But yeah, being here at the exhibit of the gallery of my latest show, Have You Cake and Eat It.
And Stu's going to be on the late shows as well, so that's why we're putting the interview out a little bit later. Stu, can you go through with me your concept behind your work?
Well, the concept is probably continually changing, or has been continually changing. I'd say that mainly is underpinned by ideas surrounded with Zen Buddhism and ritual practice, and utilising ritual and controlled practice to try and understand existing.
What is existing?
Well,
look, if you go to these big areas, then I might be a little bit more.
I suppose it's supposedly, well, I suppose it's in the same way that most art actually tackles it, because I would say that most art is talking about, well, it's a translation of somebody's witness of their own being. So existence is in living, but then their being. Well, yeah, art acts as a mirror, a window into that person's belief of how they see the world, or their gathering of their indexical knowledge of the things that formulate themselves into an ego, or them as an individual.
So I'm going to talk directly. I've got hindsight. I've already seen Stu's show, and ask about the ideas of hiding nothingness behind Nourish and eating a cake and mobile phones. And I think I know what I'm hinting at here. And those kind of things, they're heavily symbols to do with something.
Well, I hadn't shown for a long time. A previous show, which was titled Divine Nothing, this was a deeply personal show about sort of events that had happened to me in my life, and it was a way of sort of dealing with that situation at the time. I suppose this show is more outwardly focused. It's looking at consumerism and consumption, and potentially the latter part of my thinking in the show that I had 6 years ago, I think it was around about the idea of warning or foreshadowing of potential existential global crisis. Whereas now I would say that we're kind of entering into the precipice of seeing the structures that we rely on sort of dismantling. But within that process, I suppose the title piece, the Have You Cake and Eat It, is looking at the celebratory way that we view the top 1% of the people on the planet who seem to recklessly and endlessly devour and consume, and we kind of sit back and put these people on covers of Time magazine and celebrate them as being the pinnacle of society, and matter of fact, the biggest consumers, the biggest destructors of our actual lifeblood, like our actual ecological existence on the planet.
This has gone pretty deep quickly, but where's the, I'm going to fringe around it, you might not like it, fringe around things about, I know you prefer absurdity, but also something I want to talk to you personally about is the idea of nihilism, and I'm talking about, and this was come before when we did the writing for you, it's more about I see in your work personally, see a comfortability with nihilism, and not a comfortability with nihilism, and understand that we actually live in a nihilistic age.
Well, yeah, so it was a lot easier previously when somebody was nihilistic to be dismissive of it, because we lived in an environment where things had, I always talk about in pop culture and the way that things look, is we were always making things looking into the future as if there was a future.
Yeah.
Whereas I'd say there's been a dramatic shift in all forms of creativity, music, art, films, where there is this immediate foreshadowing of the fact that we're kind of accepting the fact that things are in a decline or in a collapse, or they're completely out of balance.
Just did my next bloody question. I was going to ask you about collapse particularly, and you kind of already answered it. But if we go further into that collapse, can you explain a little bit about, for people who might not understand, because me and you talk quite a lot, what this collapse is, the societal collapse, or the ideas around collapse?
Yeah, well,
there's another term as well.
It might not even become a collapse initially. I sort of see it being there will be some sort of societal shift in whatever direction that is. Whether it's that we compete for habitable land or water, or as things sort of unfold, there'll be people who say they don't believe it. There's a lot of naysayers. It seems to be people who have interest in the sale of oil. But then also, kind of see the other side of it, where I don't believe that we're able to dramatically shift from the position that we've collectively got ourselves into as a society to be able to change that route. So, to kind of say, everybody would change, quite dramatically to not having ownership of things, or not having luxury items, or coming out of the consumerist age and into late stage capitalism and transforming into something which might see a fighting chance. But I suppose my belief is that we're kind of in the precipice of the beginning of the end of. I hate when people say end of the world, because I think the world will be fine. It's more the end of the human race. What we the 2 degree temperature shift, where the main impact is large mammals, which we're on the list of. So
and it's why billionaires are obsessed with
building bunkers
of rockets, getting off the planet, so going on the
exactly, colonise Mars or build yourself a bunker.
Or Saudi Arabia building a massive street with solid air conditioning block, which is massively expensive.
It's actually flopped massively.
It's nuts.
I think they only managed to build one section of it, but that kind of links in with the whole. But then the whole societal change thing that I was talking about, that links into the idea of I can't remember, it's like a 10 or 20 minute city, where basically you don't actually move beyond the necessity of home, work and food, basically.
I totally get it. The reason I steer that is because I've just given my opinion. The cake, when we talk about the cake and you doing the cake, I was like, it kind of is the collapse in your head, because you're eating it, and if you didn't, but if you regurgitate the back out, that could be seen as some kind of symbology of the mess that's created of us consuming. And even the decimated crumbs on the floor is kind of like what becomes of all these things. And deconstructionism. So it's kind of looking at that as you taking apart these component parts like oil, earth, minerals, resources. It's obviously linked up with the phone, but this isn't my point. I kind of see, and this is because I know you as an artist, I see two artists in the show. I see the past of the last 10 years, like your performances, not how you install them, because one of my favourite things about your show is how you install them. I might ask you about choices later. There is the past you in here, there is the being and nothingness in here, that's the videos and all the titles too. I know that's a dream project, Floating Temple. That's a light title stool, which is another one. They are dream projects of you that you've been working on for years, and then kind of realise themselves in a different way, which is the new Stu, or the new artist Stu, but there's still the old in here, which does have a different, which falls into, I wouldn't have this conversation with the old Stu, I would have been talking about the ritualistic elements, the Tayo elements, the Buddhist elements.
Well, the phones represent, actually the phones and the Floating Temple represent sort of a shift in the consumption of image. So it's like my old work, but then, you know, even though it was like sort of grandiose, wide-angle film, glossy footage of ritualistic acts, I would say that, you know, like since I made those works, I think that was over the period of 6 or 7 years. It's probably been about 6 years since the last one was exhibited. But then to like actually put them on the phones and use the phones, obviously represent that consumption element, but then them to be in portrait, which is more in keeping with how people consume media these days, like TikTok and short videos. You know, so it's like so the phones were kind of representative of, you know, maybe the
immediacy.
The immediacy of this, but then also like the sort of cheapening of artwork and actually like the changing landscape of that, and you know, but then that kind of like links in the concept of in a dying world, what do you make art for?
I think you know me too well, because my direction of part of the conversation here, you want step ahead, because that was going to be the next one, is about the mobile phones, the idea of immediacy, the ideas of the social media age. Where's art, and where is art important? Is that social media art? I think both of us would agree, yes it is. But
it can be. I don't necessarily think it is, because I think it's a form of consumption which is very unthoughtful. You know, like you know, I'm not even saying that I'm not guilty of it myself, and I'm some sort of purist who only indulges in actual art and highbrow. So like, you know what I mean? I scroll for hours on end, worse than most people. Yeah, proper frontal lobe addiction.
yeah.
You know, then yeah, I think it also, like, I think with the concepts that I'm dealing with in the show, that's probably why I haven't shown for so long. So I find it difficult to make art like when thinking of these concepts.
Yeah.
Because you kind of then automatically kind of, you know, same as when I was doing my masters and reading about existentialism, you kind of get to the point where, well, what's the point?
Yeah.
Why make any of this stuff? You know, like, and as you know, you know, like, I don't tend to make art for the basis of praise of others.
No, I find that weird.
Yeah, it's like, but then that links back to like the whole ritualistic element, like, and actually like the way that I see art is it has always been a shrine or an altar in a way. Like, you know, if you think back to cave paintings, it was kind of like linking back to early forms of religion like animism, where the cave paintings were kind of like a worship of the systems that the people received. Like later rituals and stuff came from agriculture and tilling the land and, you know, the seasons and hoping that they had a good season. So it's difficult now because, you know, our systems, our nourishment comes from, you know, like really consumerist things and really unnatural things, and the things that we choose to worship, or the things that we sort of frame in artwork on as sort of mysticised anymore. You know, the kind of like, it's become like the social media thing, the consumption of image. You know, everybody's a photographer now. Everybody endlessly photographs their own face.
Yeah.
You know, like,
on their feet.
Yeah. You know, that's what I mean. It's like, you know, the other thing, like my background in performance art, it's like there used to be like a real surgence of like the older heads in performance art talking about nudity and questioning why you weren't naked. And whereas now I'd say that nudity is just so desensitized. Like when you think about like what we have access to on the internet, and you think about things like OnlyFans and all these other things that have come out in recent years, where it's just so instantaneous and so fast, and there is actually no buffer between sort of, you know, being regular and being photographed or utilising those photographs in the male gaze to climb up the greasy pole of capitalism.
I was going to bring it straight back to capitalism and techno-feudalism, and I know you don't like that term. It's one of mine. Well, it's not my personal one, but it's I do like the idea of technocratic landowners. And your work does kind of fall on to talk about them. I don't know how you feel about that whole techno-feudalism kind of.
I think.
Or do you sit more mysticism? Because
No, I play with mysticism, to be honest. It's more of like an aesthetic tool, more than anything. And I suppose it's the only bit of my work that stays hopeful, which then links back to the whole Zen Buddhist prospect, which is, should I spend my time being worried about these things, or should I focus on, my own being and being still with the worry that, do I even worry? What's the point of worrying?
This is a complicated bit for me, and I know you know this, we've talked about loads of times, because my relationship to the audience of my work is really different to yours. So you take this Zen Buddhism thing, kind of role of just sitting and acting, especially for your performances. Let's go with this, which I'm going to move into because this is a bit more constructed as a show than just a performance. Not that performance isn't constructed. But like, if you're sitting there as the Buddhist who is just basically letting the life pass by them, letting capitalism pass by them, letting consumerism pass by them, why are you making art? What is the message to the viewer? Where's the viewer in this, and why do you care about the viewer? Do you not care about the viewer? Not in a nasty way, but in kind of...
Well, it's like a Byzantine pillar saint who go and sit on a pole, so you'd be closer to the divine, and in the hope of his isolation being in some way, because believing that there's an interconnection between human beings, that I think it was Adam Watts talked about consciousness being like a central light or a light the layman way I described it was like a light bulb with a cylindrical black bit of card wrapped around it, and every soul or every being is just a hole poked in the black card. And it gives you the illusion of an individual, a singular, but actually that the singular is the light that's emanating from the centre core. Same way that the Pillar Saints believed that if they became more enlightened or more close to the source of divinity, that in some way a small part of that would filter down to the rest or the others. Or it wouldn't even need to filter down to the rest or the others, because in their becoming enlightened in themselves, they're enlightening the main source. I don't know. It's a pragmatic part of my practice, because obviously I kind of ended up down this route through existentialism, and then kind of like through actually going through existentialism, maybe have some sort of element of I don't like to call it spiritualism, because I think of it in that context, and I think it's a bit of a messy phrase.
Spiritualism is different from mysticism. I feel like there's some comfortabilities within mysticism that you can kind of play with this stuff. I shouldn't go into what I've been reading, but at least again, this was about this interview and doing research on ideas around yours. But mysticism, could we understand mysticism as a science? This might get edited out because I don't know, this is probably one for the pub. But could mysticism be seen as a science?
Well, I think there's a lot of stuff that is rooted in science. It's like, I don't know how true they are. Could just be like internet sort of rubbish that I've like read over the years, but it's like stuff like the mistranslation of the word of God instead of the word of God, like from the Hebrew text it was supposed to be the sound of God, and that sort of like links into the idea of the God frequency, like things like the solfeggio frequencies and 432 Hz being the overall ringing of the universe. And
but that would also make more sense with language for you, because language was represented, especially back at that time, was physical representations of sound.
Yeah, somebody, I can't remember who it was, but somebody was like, is God sound, or is God a reverberation? And Tesla said something like along the lines of, if you unlock the secrets of frequency, you'll unlock the secrets of the universe. So the idea that everything is held in perfect balance by perfect ringing that peters off the back end of the Big Bang, which is why in like one of the phone videos I was ringing a bell repeatedly, and I got obsessed with building horns for a while to try and make false divine frequential horn noises. It was like quite tongue-in-cheek and kind of quite like lame and builds, but like You know, because it's like it's almost like kind of like wanting to believe in it, but then also like having like two. It's like the same way the show has two sides. Like, you know, one half of me is like kind of like, oh, that'll be great, but
one half's
and then it depends what side of the bed I get out of, I suppose.
It's quite honest. It's quite honest. Like it's an honest, in my opinion, it's an honest portrayal of where we are as a species in a bit of an unknown future, a nihilistic idea of our futures don't matter, rather than just are we all going to, is the apocalypse going to happen? It's like, is there any point to our future? I feel that's more where society I would possibly see as that, and that's why I keep going back to nihilism, and I'm searching for, are you trying to find an answer, or are you just being?
No, I suppose that's when the Zen Buddhism kicks in, because, you know, it's the Matrix scene, you know, there is no spoon.
Yeah.
You know, the answer that you're searching for is the question is pointless.
And that's why it's totally nice. But if you did have to fall into it, like,
how do you think I feel?
but and a lot of people, and I think you agree with us on this. Like, I've always found absurdity as being an answer to nihilism. Like the ideas of existentialism, more than the ideas of the absurdity out there to the layman, like the Camus Hegel ideas of absurdity is quite comfortable and quite.
Yeah.
Just
I think anybody who knows me, if you listen to me talk about the things that I think about on a regular basis, I suppose it's probably quite surprising that I laugh quite so much. But then, you know, I think, you know, like, I don't know, it's the same thing where, you know, why take it seriously? You know, like, you know, but then I suppose I'm in a comfortable position where I just so happen to be thrown into the world where I have the comfortability of the society that I was born into to be comfortable enough to laugh at the tragedy of it all.
And even make art.
Yeah.
There's a comfortability in making art.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, quite likely that, you know, you're born in a society where you couldn't make art, you'd be digging up the lithium mine for the batteries for...
Yeah. You might still do some sketches.
for me, making my art in the West. You know?
You might still do sketches or do something else, but you probably wouldn't be thinking about it in the lines of it being fine art.
It's a luxury.
It is a luxury. All of this is a luxury. I mean, this show talks about luxury and commodification and ideas of progress.
Yeah.
Do you know a big one for me? And I'm just finding my own days of work. I went straight away to the phones and thought of Silicon Valley and thought of resources and resource mining, even the plastic in the paddling pool, even light bulb, all those things.
But you know, with the phones, I think that's something you were setting up. It's literally, I haven't went out and bought phones for the show. It's all the phones that I could find in my house.
Yeah.
Yeah. The fact that I was able to find 6 redundant phones and repurpose them to show videos on.
And every single one, what I like about that is every single one of those one works still.
I would say that, exactly.
So it's a total demonstration of progress and consumerism.
Yeah, I would say that, well, I think it's like stuff to do with batteries and things, you know, but then instead of repairing it, you just, but then the same with the paddling pool. It's like, I think it's, like, you know, it's the company that probably manufactures that paddling pool is only kept in business because of artists using it. Like, so I don't think there's that many people getting them for the kids year in and year out. I don't even think it's that good of a paddle. I think it's a pen from Argos. You know, then I think the light bulb and everything else is from Amazon or something. Like, you know, it's like, you know, and the floating temples made out of probably the boxes that the light bulb came in, and or the polystyrene. Polystyrene board of the. I think the only thing on there that isn't from that is like I think the little figurine of me is a bit of microcrystalline wax, which I've carved into like something that looks like an old Buddhist form of me, I guess. But I suppose it's like a romanticised isolation. I think that's what my earlier work always kind of was yearning after something that possibly wasn't achievable from a Westerner's viewpoint. It was kind of like a flirtation into a world that I romanticise about being, but you know, would it be authentic for me to go and be a saddie, or would it be authentic for me to go to a monastery in Tibet and become a monk.
Yeah.
You know, out of context, is that even, you know, I would, you know, there's part of me that would do those things, but then I think there's another part of me that kind of like almost like recoils and a half cringe at the idea that some white privileged man from the West would go and flirtate and like, well, it's been happening for years. That's why the ashrams blew up. That's why you had people like Osho who ended up starting a cult and buying a ranch in America because loads of rich Westerners went looking for something more than the consumerist culture that had been made in the 80s.
Don't know if you know about that, but like there is that massive movement, the yoga movement and all those kind of things. The mindful movement, and I hate mindfulness because mindfulness came from, so you're not getting too much into my opinion, but mindfulness came from this whole yoga idea that we're all going to do these kind of things to feel better about ourselves, but that was because we're actually falling into this quite Machiavellian and narcissistic kind of business world. They came along hand in hand, and one of them kind of felt like you do these ritualistic practices to not engage with the morality of your existence.
Yeah, well, I think it's another one of those things. Again, I can't remember the exact. I think Alan Watts was talking about it in one of his lectures, and we were basically saying like, but then it's kind of part of the Buddhist practice. This idea of the longing for a particular location, or once I get this thing, I'll be happy, or once I get to this point, I'll be happy. Once I go and become a Tibetan monk, I'll be enlightened and I'll be happy and I'll accept my life. Or you know, once I build a floating temple and go float on a lake for a week and isolate myself, like, you know. But I think it's like a momentary fix. It's something that can become quite addictive.
Plus, like a lot of the Buddhists, it's also death.
Well, it's you know, I don't think mostly like it's like in Buddhism there is no, they don't fear death.
Yeah, they don't know.
And then actually like the idea of dealing with grief is to lean directly into it so that you don't miss any moment of it. Yeah. Because if you miss any moment of something that's sort of fleeting and passing, you'll regret it later on, sort of thing. Like,
yeah, they talk about Buddhism a lot of the time when you read early stuff about self-awareness. Buddhists will always use an examples about how sitting and noticing. Yeah, I won't go into it.
The only way is through. You know, you can't avoid any of these things. The same way that you can't avoid any of the themes that I'm sort of like talking about in my way. But then that's quite a divisive thing, because you know, some people don't believe that the world is on the precipice of well, it's not the world. I keep on fall apart in the same way that the humans, you know, we're not really, you know, now that there's plastic and everything, how that can have a long-term effect on us. You know, we switch from smoking cigarettes to toking on lithium-ion batteries, which taste like false fruit, and you know, it's like, I don't know, it's like kind of like makes you think of like worshipping false deity, but like in the sense of agricultural type ritual and ideas and beliefs, like eating synthetic foods and wearing synthetic materials, and you know, I think it's just yeah, I don't know. But, you know, like I'm not like doom gloom. You know,
you're definitely not.
I would love to see it all not go that way, but how that would happen, I don't know, because you know, I made the self-indulgent choice of studying 2 art degrees instead of studying ecology, or I don't know, like.
I think the next one I kind of wanted to go into is your aesthetic choices towards this show, because it does feel different, but it feels similar but different.
Yeah, I think that I should have what I've been showing in so long, you know. So I think it's stuff that had been happening in my studio, I guess. You know, I don't know. Like, I'm not as keen to perform live anymore. Like, I probably will do at some point, but I think it's the more grandiose things that I've been trying to do for a long time. If the opportunity arose to do them, that would probably come first. I've never really wanted to scale that stuff to make it more achievable. You know, whereas I think with this show, it's kind of reflective. It was kind of like looking back on my old show. It's got it's re-represented film and stuff that was in my last show, but in a very different way. It is more installation based, but then I kind of wanted it to be a show of two halves.
Yeah.
So like the sort of like the very sort of like zen feeling side, and then the sort of more darker side, which kind of I suppose represents the two sides of my thinking and the dualities of most of the thoughts that I have. You know, I don't just settle on one side and stick to it, I guess.
Yeah, it's quite interesting for me, not being so much performance art, even though I went to performance art uni, but seeing it as this, in my head, staples it down more. It makes it a little bit less ambiguous and makes it a little bit, and I like that personally, but a lot of people who are purist towards performance art probably wouldn't.
No, well, because they're the same rules of performance art. But I don't even know if they actually exist anymore, because I think you know, like the purity of the purity.
They do use that term.
Yeah, but then you know what I mean, you know, I'd say that probably the monumental heyday of contemporary sort of fine art performance would be like New York, you know, and you know, and Vito Conchi and people like that, where I had certain rules, it had to be real, you know, it couldn't be. But then I suppose you went from something like the Viennese Actionists into New York, and then you had McCarthy, who was then making things, and I think he commented on the fact that you know that in Europe it was all real blood and real shit.
Yeah.
In New York it's all chocolate and raspberry jam. You know, it's so I think then you know, that idea of purity in performance, but then also just I suppose it was the way you film performance. It was a big no-no at film performance. There used to be photography documented, and then it moved into you film it, but then it has to be filmed as one big long thing.
Yeah.
You can't then edit it down.
Yeah,
you can't then just represent a part of it, where I've kind of broken that for part of the fun, but then I suppose that links it and being on the phones, shorten it down into something which is then more social mediable.
Yeah.
So it's but then having them alongside next to each other, and the different sounds of each of the performance integrating into each other and kind of working as almost like a one piece.
I think in the next 10 years you'll probably see that with performance art anyway. I think performance art and things like TikTok as platforms are probably going to merge quite a bit. So you'd probably find that, it's just my opinion, that artists, performance artists are dictated by the length of a reel.
I suppose I think about not even just performance art, but art in general. I think about it in the same context as I do about technology. I think the big thing that will change, and it might not even be immediate, but it'll be interfacing.
Yeah.
It's how is that visual consumed? You know, it won't be that long until we're removed from screens. So we won't be looking at a screen anymore, it'll be augmented into the space around us. Does that then mean galleries won't exist? Because art is consumed entirely as an individual in an augmented space. You know, would it be you know, AR, VR, you know, completely immersive sort of situations, or you know, because then it kind of broadens the scope of what's actually physically possible. Or wouldn't be physically, but metaphysically possible. You know, you could then conceive of a sculpture that people can then view, which is as big as a building, but without the strategic issues that you come up with when trying to do a large project.
See, I don't think I'll ever go that way, because that just doesn't, as an art viewer, it just doesn't excite us.
Yeah, but then, you know, Are we not the aging old dogs of the art world? You know,
I'm going to put my 2 cents up. I think that the other side to that would be people still want to have that physicality. So people still want that human imagination more than a human prompt.
I suppose it links into the whole thing that I'm saying about society and how society moves forward. Because then, one of the biggest concepts that people talk about is a society where ownership doesn't exist. Like, you don't own a car, you don't own a house, you don't own artwork. Where you'd be subscribed in, or it's just you don't receive money because you don't need money, because you just do your job, and then all these things are then granted to you. And then if we live in this idea of like a 20-minute city, then what's the concept of leaving your house to go to something which is not reasonable for you to leave for? So therefore your consumption of these things then becomes an augmented situation, or something which is close to the reality, but not. I'm talking completely beyond science fiction. But it's stuff that I do think of. It's stuff that I do think.
I agree. I do think I feel these are quite pressing questions to the art world at the moment, like the age we live in, the value of art, how art's consumed. And I always think art's going to have a place, but does society have a place for art? I think
it's also this idea of like when people start talking about making art sustainable. It's like, really, like, how sustainable do you think it could be? You know what I mean? And as I said, it's a luxury. So like, for the cost of me having a studio and the materials that I expend, or the software that I use to make, or the cameras that I use to film it, then I could feed or clothe somebody or educate. So it's like it's
the term art for art's sake is kind of, I believe in art for art's sake, but it's kind of being made a little bit on. You've got your 1% that can carry on, and I mean 1% of the art world, like your Damien Hirsts, your big players, that will carry on, and people will value what they make because there's an economic value to it. But the people on the bottom, really, do they really want to see art for art's sake, or art for human expression, art for the artist, or do they want to see a community project?
I suppose the great test for the art world, if you're talking about like people like Case and all these other big names, or people who actually sell work and actually make some sizable fortune, would be if the loop for money laundering was closed, and see if the art market still survives. Because I think it was one of the only things that didn't dip in the recession. And I read somewhere that it was something to do along the lines of rich oligarchs buying artwork to hide the money, or tax breaks, etc.
Whether legal or illegal, art's the best place to put money into, even more than property. Generally, high art.
I think if you're buying that sort of stuff, I've definitely tried to like being the best place to put my money into, since I've piled lots of my own money in, but not got very little money back out.
Again, we're talking about, and I get a bit annoyed sometimes when people who are just artists, and I mean that in a kind of pure way, rather than who don't entertain or don't go along with that high art market. I do get a little bit annoyed sometimes when I see people posting overly about it, because I'm like, you're not part of that art world. It's like there's two art worlds.
Yeah, of course there is. It's a massive privilege to be in a position where, I don't know, you leave your grandiose uni in London and get picked up by, I don't know, a big art dealer who then sets the bar for your artwork, selling for.
You can drop off a cliff as well.
There's the quick burn blow-ups and stuff. But, obviously, I studied here in the north of England, and the only time I studied away was in the north of Holland. So, I suppose there was probably a bit more of an active ability to sell art when I was in Holland. But then that's a more lucrative society. Where I lived was more middle class. For being a northern city, like by comparison to Newcastle, it was twin city of Newcastle where I lived, and it was definitely a more well-off city than Newcastle, just judging by the architecture and how the city ran, things like that. I don't even know that for a fact. Somebody's probably going to look it up and go, Stu's talking rubbish. Like, Groningen actually has a smaller economy than Newcastle.
I'm going but it might be in different ways. But there is that kind of thing. Does class play anything into your work?
Well, yeah, unavoidably so.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm not from a well-off background. Like I'm from a working class background. My dad was a metal worker, and my mum worked in type and pool and various other jobs. And she, like, her last job before she retired was a school administrator. So probably they provided me probably more than what they had when they were growing up.
Yeah.
So my mum was from like West End, New Greenholm. My dad grew up in Swole and lived there all his life. Worked on oil rigs and stuff, But then it was probably my dad was driving force behind. Like, well, I remember like finishing school. He was like kind of a man. You told me, you're going to study art because that's what you told me when you were 8-year-old. He said, I'm going to go to art school. You do that first before you do anything else. Then my mum liked everything I did because I did it.
Did you do it?
I just didn't quite understand. But it's the opposite of the Billy Elliot thing, you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like, you're not doing much, you're from Newcastle family.
Well, that's kind of where my brain's going at the moment, is like, do you think there's an attitude towards maybe being from regions and something like that?
Of course there is.
And class and being able to. I think we're getting into a different conversation about who is art for.
Well, yeah, I think it's. I try and always make I'm not going to talk rubbish and say that like I angle it like specifically, but I do try and have some element which is understandable from a glance.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's to try and entice people in who might not look at art. But it's very difficult to then sort of balance that between sort of at a glance sort of information and fine art education, because you're kind of taught that it needs to sort of be this level of like concept. But
what's important in art? Is it that idea of being conceptual as aesthetics? As important. This is a personal one at the moment. This is
for me.
Yeah. I'm actually just asking your opinion. These are conversations I'm having on the outside.
I don't know. I'm kind of like a kid building a sandcastle on the beach. I'm like a kid building a sandcastle on the beach because I just.
You did do some circles.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it's kind of linked into that idea. Like it's and I hate kind of being like, it's about play. Yeah. But realistically, like a lot of the things that I do, it's like, building a den or building a sandcastle or something like that. It's like I'd quite happily do it without witness.
Yeah.
I'd quite happily engage. I'd quite happily engage with most of my practice, or there's the outer round of my practice is just like what comes out the other side, what makes a show. So it's like if I get given a show, it's then it has to be distilled down into what people are going to look at. There's a lot of the stuff that I do, especially performative wise, I would have probably just done just for the entertainment of doing it.
Yeah, and it probably would have existed as art without it having to be.
Well, luckily, like most of the stuff that I did do, which entertains myself doing it, like it also is being quite a spectacle for other people to watch.
But then it just becomes a spectacle, and it doesn't have without the.
Well, initially when somebody looks at it, it's a spectacle, but then like in most of those scenarios, and I think you've been around for a few of them, somebody might come in and they might kind of like have a titter at it or like, but then that's quite a good segue.
It is.
You know what I mean? It's like a gateway art.
Yeah.
Like get them in on the basis of it being a spectacle, but then when they realise that it's quite a long, laborious task, it's not stopping. So they've seen it and they've had their momentary sort of like, oh wow, that's creative. But then as it goes on and on and on, so like God, like this is.
It's kind of like guerrilla art.
Well, I wouldn't call it that. I'd say it's more just like, I suppose like, you know, you do anything, even the most mundane thing for long enough, and it becomes something which is like, it starts off as spectacle and sort of like, you can kind of turn quite quickly into other higher emotions like concern or you know, or wonder and things like that. Like one of the very first things that I did, which I'd probably say is like in the long line of me doing performances, standing in the centre point of Groningen for 8 hours, and by the end of that the police had turned up and were pretty much standing around me telling people to move on, and people were asking what I was doing, and the police was saying, well, nothing, there's nothing to see here. But then they were like, well, why are you here standing around this guy who's just stood? And then when the clock struck 8, I walked away. But that, you know, from the first 3 hours nobody paid any attention, and then after 3 hours it was like, God, that, like, I heard somebody say like, that guy was here, like when we walked through here before. Yeah. Well, that's what we would say. Peter and I was
Both sides.
pretty honest.
And the last question is, and you can tell us to go F off if you want. What is art?
It's what I said at the start. It's
I'll just left it there.
no, it's a ritualistic practice in which we utilise to try in some way communicate what we see from internally, externally.
Yeah, I agree. Sort of.
Fuck off.
The rest of it, the longer side, yeah, I agree. But the rest thank you very much.
No worries.
Yeah, come on, Stu, show.